Hello everyone. I originally made this video or this presentation on consciousness to start out as a primer for a introduction to intuition course that I'm developing, but I figured it'd be really good and helpful for anybody else to just create this video, post it, and then just see where it goes. So let's begin. So to give you a little bit of information on myself, I am a big science fiction fan, and growing up, I always loved watching the new Doctor Who series from the BBC. It really is a great show with lots of incredible moments, but one in particular that has always stuck with me was from a Christmas special from the 11th Doctor. You go through the opening scene, and finally the Doctor pops in. He goes into a fun and witty monologue flying around the room, and then he suddenly just stops and points at a lady frozen in the middle of the room, asking, "Who is she?" The Scrooge character of the episode dismisses her, saying that she's nobody important, to which the Doctor replies, "In 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important." I truly believe that. Each and every single person on this earth, their consciousness, your consciousness, what and who you are, is worth more than the world's weight in gold. Nothing else matters more, and by the end of this presentation, I want to show you why. I realize you may not feel that way. A lot of people online these days are describing themselves as background characters or NPCs, otherwise known as non-player characters. NPC is a video game term. As you play through a game, you come across programmed characters that assist you as the main character, or the protagonist, on your journey. These NPCs can be shop owners, kids with side quests, basically any entity in the game that is not you or another player. NPCs run on set schedules. They're predictable, and they run on loops. Does any of that sound familiar? Every day, the majority of us wake up, we go to work, we get back from work, tired and exhausted, we eat dinner, we watch TV, and then finally we go to bed, only to repeat this process ad nauseum until you die or retire. More and more people are describing how they feel like they are on the 9 to 5 death spiral. Guys, there is so much more to life than this. Just feel inside your heart and listen for what excites you most, and you're already there. Now, I'm not here to be your prototypical male motivational speaker, the ones that yell at you, yell at the screen to just wake up at 5 a.m. and bust out a workout and snort a shot of espresso before eating exactly one egg white for breakfast, then spending the entire day shoving nobodies out of the way as you build a business and retire at the age of 16. We've all seen those people online, and honestly, a lot of celebrities, athletes, and the ultra wealthy take this approach to life. They seemingly live the life of our dreams. But if you speak with them, they too describe emotional discontent. Just ask any celebrity and they will tell you that fame isn't everything. Ask a rich person and they will tell you that money isn't everything. Models will tell you that beauty isn't everything. And the smartest members of our species tell you that brains aren't everything. When you have all the money in the world and you've accomplished all of your goals, what then? What do you do when you finally hit retirement and accomplish your dreams? It seems like no matter what, there is always this void of suffering inside ourselves that can never be filled, almost as if true peace and contentment and happiness can never occur. I'd like to tell you now the story about Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise known as the Buddha. Siddhartha was born into royalty as a prince. His father, knowing the suffering of the outside world, wanted to shelter his son and give him the perfect life. So he kept the prince in the palace and gave him everything he could have ever wanted. Endless gifts, gourmet foods, everything you could dream of as a pampered prince. But Siddhartha noticed that over time, the joy from the gifts would fade, and eventually no gift brought him any joy. One day he decided to sneak out of the palace, where he encountered the poverty and suffering of the poorest of the poor. He came face to face with starvation, disease, and abject poverty. This truly shook him to his core. Naturally, he did what all teenage boys do, and he blamed his father. Siddhartha blamed him for his own discontentment and for the cage of a palace he had lived in, being sheltered from all of what he had seen in the outside world. Siddhartha then decided to do what any rational teen boy would do, and leave the palace, renounce his titles, to live on the street begging for food. Well, you can just imagine how that went. Several years passed, and he began to realize that, poverty freaking sucks as well. Who would have thought, right? But he had lived the life of both the ultra-wealthy and the poorest of the poor, only to suffer at both ends. He meditated on this and realized that life is run by our desires, and it is these desires themselves that lead to our suffering. We feel like if we only had that car, or if we had just had that house with a spouse and kids, or if we just had fill in the blank, we would be truly happy. Some of us spend years paying any cost to obtain our desires, only to realize that it just cannot fill the void we feel within ourselves. It's an endless loop of desires, trying to get that desire, and then ending up suffering, and then tracing a new desire to fill that suffering, and so on and so on. But what if it isn't? What if there was a way to end our own inner suffering? To be truly happy, at peace and content with yourself and the world. To wake up in the morning and to look out across the world and to truly feel that all of this experience on earth is truly perfect. Buddha realized that nothing outside of ourselves could ever truly fill that void within each of us. The only way to be truly at peace is through your own consciousness, through the love that exists at the deepest levels of your being. Now, what do I mean by consciousness? What is consciousness? It's one of life's great mysteries, after all. People have sat under the stars in the deepest moments of contemplation and asked, "What am I?" for millennia. I'd like to now take you through my own journey of discovering the science behind consciousness. It all started the night of the 2016 US presidential election. I stayed up late waiting to find out the results. That year, the previous year, fake news and propaganda were two of the major themes of that election. So after the winner was announced, I decided that I wanted to actually understand what propaganda was and why it worked. Over the next 5 years, I spent quite a bit of my free time studying propaganda. I studied historical examples of how propaganda was used. I studied marketing, communications, linguistics, and learned that propaganda uses stories relevant to their audience to shape cultural beliefs on large scales. Propaganda uses tools like metaphors and shortcuts, which our brains love, in order to build connections between different ideas that benefit the organizations creating the propaganda. Diving deeper, I realized that the words and images propaganda uses affect us on a biological level. Take something as simple as this pie, for example. When I say the word pie, or you look at the image of it, as Americans or Europeans or anybody that's been on the internet, we all understand what pie is. It's often a sweet treat with fruits or creams, but sometimes pie can be savory, like with chicken pot pie. Beneath the definition lies a fuzzy cloud of what pie means to each individual person. Our experiences with pie shape how we think of it, or even what we think of it. Anytime you have ever eaten a pie, or seen one in person, in a movie, or heard about it in a song, that experience colors your perception and understanding of what pie is. For example, built into my own definition of pie is a wonderful memory of me and my dad going to a diner in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, where we split a really delicious strawberry rhubarb pie. All of those emotions and feelings within that moment and my memory of it shape my own personal understanding of what pie is. And all of that is true for every single word or idea you have ever thought or seen. Reaching this understanding led me to research neuroscience and trying to figure out how consciousness is affected by words and emotions. Our brains are made up of billions of neurons with billions more connections between them, and this is the model that most of us know. It states that we are basically a squishy organ piloting a skeletal mech with meat armor. This model presents consciousness as an electrochemical calculation between neurons in different areas of our brain. This is what a lot of us were taught in school, and something about it always just seemed incomplete to me. There seemed to be a disconnect between this very logical, almost computer-like neuron calculator piloting a biological mech suit and the way I understood words to be based on a fuzzy cloud of experiences we have ever had with that word or idea. The fuzziness of that just didn't match how I felt a computer could operate. So I kept searching for an answer until I came across the works of Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff. Their joint work on the orchestrated objective reduction theory, otherwise known as the ORC-OR theory, dives into anesthesia and how anesthesia actually functions. You see, anesthetic compounds selectively block consciousness in patients. All of our unconscious biological bodily processes continue to work, but our waking mind disappears somehow. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose discovered that anesthesia doesn't block neural receptors or change the electrical impulses between them. Instead, anesthesia acts at a much deeper level within the cells themselves. They found that there are quantum vibrations that occur within the microtubules of our cells. Microtubules help our cells maintain their shape along with a number of other functions. In the image on your right, all of the green, wispy, colored shapes within those cells that you see are microtubules. So when anesthesia is applied, these two doctors discovered that these quantum vibrations within those green microtubules slowed significantly, indicating that our consciousness is a result of quantum effects within our cells, more specifically within those green microtubules within that image. Their research shows that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe and that consciousness itself has quantum properties. I remember watching the video where they describe their work, and I just sat in contemplation for hours. I realized after years of searching, I'd finally gotten my answer for what consciousness is, but I knew that there was just something more to their work. What did it mean that our consciousness is quantum? What does it mean that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe? I began to think about properties found in quantum mechanics. Properties like, properties like non-locality, or what Einstein famously termed spooky action at a distance, where entangled particles interact instantaneously with each other across space and time, faster than the speed of light without ever physically interacting. Non-locality is a quantum phenomenon, which means that if consciousness was quantum, it had to have this property as well. At that moment, I was struck with pure, indescribable excitement. Quantum consciousness, with all the properties found in quantum mechanics, allowed for a scientific explanation for the paranormal, spiritual, and non-physical phenomena to exist. A quantum consciousness that can inherently act non-locally also means that telekinesis, moving objects with just your consciousness, and even telepathy, communicating non-verbally between two consciousnesses, was indeed possible. Not only that, but consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe allows for consciousness to exist beyond our bodies and biology. That provides a scientific basis for spirits, ghosts, angels and demons, out-of-body experiences, astral projection, all of that and more to exist and interact in all the different ways that have been described in religious texts, shown in movies and reality TV shows, and talked about in folklore and myths all around the world for millennia. After all, non-physical consciousnesses are taken extremely seriously by Native Americans and Native tribes all around the world. They will even forbid people from going to certain locations where they understand aggressive, non-physical consciousnesses to exist. I only recently made the connection between quantum consciousness and the paranormal and parascience thanks to the amazing work of Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff. But dedicated study of the parasciences has been conducted for centuries. Many of the world's brightest scientists, biologists, chemists, philosophers, physiologists, writers, and inventors, as well as the most powerful governments in the world, have poured their money and lives into understanding the unexplainable. Going all the way back to Isaac Newton, after his discovery of gravity, he spent much of his time studying alchemy and the occult, trying to figure out the connection between ancient holy texts and science. Moving into more recent history, geniuses like Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison worked on devices like the spirit phone, which was meant to communicate with the dead. Also, people like Marie Curie, the only person to ever have a Nobel Prize in two separate fields, physics and chemistry, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, the founders of modern psychology, Jack Parsons, one of the founders of NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs, and many, many more of the world's best and brightest have spent years of their lives researching the parasciences. Many of them have been knighted, hold Nobel Prizes along with hundreds of scientific awards, and many of them have been professors at some of the most prestigious universities in the world, or invented devices that form the basis for our modern world and the science underlying our technology. To quote Dr. Alan Gould's 1982 book, Mediumship and Survival, A Century of Investigations, such a list ought to be sufficient to demonstrate that ESP research is, quote-unquote, not a playground for superstitious cranks. On the contrary, the standards for research have in general been rigorous, far more rigorous, as psychologists have on occasion had to admit, than those of psychology. One of the best articles that I have ever read that covers some of the highlights of over 150 years of parascientific research from across the world is called Beyond the Brain: The Survival of Human Consciousness After Permanent Bodily Death. It was written by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, who is the recipient of the only doctoral diploma in parapsychology ever awarded by an accredited university. His paper dives into 9 different topics, covering examples like near-death experiences with cardiac arrest survivors, where in 10 to 20% of the cases studied, survivors recall powerful experiences with life-changing memories, even out-of-body experiences, despite the fact that in cardiac arrest, we know there is no brain activity that occurs. Or yet other examples of individuals getting phone calls from deceased loved ones. Another example includes a Philadelphia woman perfectly speaking a dialect of Swedish from the 13 or 1400s while under hypnosis without ever having heard the language. There are also documented, studied, and verified cases of reincarnation from the University of Virginia, where the department chair interviewed children, collected autopsy reports, spoke with local police, and was able to show that children had memories of past lives, knowing intimate details of families they'd never met or had any connection to in their current lifetime. Research into the paranormal and the parasciences doesn't stop there, though. Organizations, businesses, and governments have studied consciousness for decades as well. Who here has seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark? That movie was based on real events that occurred within the Nazi regime. Leaders within the SS in Germany during World War II organized a number of expeditions across Europe and all around the world, interviewing witches and psychics, studying ancient texts, and visiting archaeological sites, all in search of powers and tools they could use against their enemies. They weren't the only government to study the parasciences, though. Ed May, along with other key people, describe how both the US and Soviet Union poured billions of dollars into a psychic arms race during the Cold War in their book called ESP Wars East and West. The Stargate Project was one such program that ran from 1971 until it was shut down in 1995. It was established to study psychic phenomena for military use by the U.S. military within the United States Army. Lynn Buchanan, one of these quote-unquote psychic spies, was trained by the U.S. Army to use his mind to gather intelligence on foreign assets anywhere in the world, in a process known as remote viewing. Lynn states that the U.S. military has used the intelligence he and his Army unit remotely viewed to plan real-world military operations. Along with world governments, universities have at times also allowed research into the parasciences. Earlier, I mentioned how the University of Virginia studied reincarnation cases. One of the most prestigious universities in the world, Princeton, had a lab dedicated entirely to the scientific study of consciousness-related physical phenomena. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, or the quote-unquote PEAR Lab, for years ran experiments where individuals tried to push the results of true random number generators with only their consciousness. True random number generators measure the radioactive decay of nuclear materials, which is a truly random physical process. The generators then transform the values of radioactivity that they measure into bits, or zeros and ones, for computer computations. Test subjects at the PEAR Lab would sit down in a room and just simply imagine that they were pushing the numbers from the random number generators to be either high, low, or they would be told not to try influencing the generators at all as a baseline for the experiments. The PEAR Lab found that consciousness is able to influence the nuclear decay of radioactive materials. Not only that, but they took these random number generators to football games, to the opera, and to other public events. Each time they found that the collective consciousness of the crowd had a measurable effect in altering the results of the random number generators outside of the baseline. And the plot you see on the screen, the green squiggly line is the baseline, showing that within those dotted bounds, that is what they expect the baseline of the experiments to be within based on truly random probability and statistics. The blue value is what they measured in the results from thousands of experimental trials, and the red line is the high result from thousands of experimental trials, showing that their results were statistically significantly far outside of what should have been statistically probable for their experiments. All of this is to say that consciousness has been rigorously studied by the world's best and brightest, as well as the most powerful organizations in the world for over 150 years. Recent findings within the Orc-Or theory from Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff have shown that consciousness comes from quantum vibrations within the cells of our body, and consciousness itself is fundamental to the universe. Guys, we literally vibe. Science has finally begun to show that the connection between the physical and the spiritual is quantum consciousness. Your consciousness, your quantum consciousness, which exists and persists even after permanent bodily death. Your quantum consciousness, which is more than just the functions of the brain as an organ. It has the ability to manipulate the fundamental forces of nature, like the strong and weak nuclear forces, as the PEAR Lab showed with conscious influence of true random number generators. Consciousness can also manipulate the electromagnetic force, which professional and amateur ghost hunters and researchers in the parasciences have documented and studied for years. Quantum consciousness, which has the inherent quality of being able to act non-locally across space-time. Guys, nothing else can do that. Your consciousness is literally the most powerful force in the universe. It has been here long before who and what you are in this lifetime, and it will continue to persist long after this lifetime. Now, what I am saying is that you can use this information to build the life of your dreams. By following your intuition, the messaging system of your larger consciousness, you can change your life and even the world. Have you ever had just an uneasy feeling about a job or a person you just met, or even just taking a drive to the supermarket and you knew that something just wasn't quite right? Later, you find out that your hunch was correct. This sixth sense, following your gut, is listening to your intuition, to your larger consciousness. Other more uncanny examples exist of twin telepathy. Two twins living on the other side of the world, and one twin breaks their arm, and suddenly the other twin, halfway around the world, gets phantom pains in that same arm, all due to non-locality in quantum mechanics. There are also the phenomenon known as mother's intuition. I'm sure many of us have had experience where you and your siblings start to do something that you all know you shouldn't do, and your mother shouts from across the house to just knock it off. She had no way of knowing you all were getting into trouble, but somehow she just knew that something was happening. Other examples of mother's intuition have shown mothers saving their children at the last second from physical harm. But intuition is just more than just negative experiences. Anytime you get just a sudden jolt of inspiration, the chills during a movie or motivational speech, or even when you gain deep insight or experience transformational moments in your dreams, all of this is your intuition as well. And following your intuition can literally change your world and the world around you. In 1855, Friedrich Kekule, the man shown here, a German theoretical chemist, had a dream of a snake eating its tail. He stated later in life that this dream was his inspiration for understanding the chemical structure of benzene, which he had worked years on trying to understand. Srinivasa Ramanujan, the person shown here, is responsible for compiling almost 4,000 mathematical identities and equations by himself, more than anybody else. When asked about his pure mathematical talent, he would state that goddesses would visit him in his dreams and show him these formulas, which, upon waking, he would then frantically write down in his notebooks. And finally, Einstein's most famous work, Relativity, can be traced back to a dream he had as a child about sledding. In this dream, he was sledding quickly down a hill with his friends, and he realized that he began to approach the speed of light. Looking up, he saw the stars begin to shift in color. While he didn't truly understand what this meant at the time as a kid, he knew at that moment that this was the most important question of his life. And that dream led him to researching and discovering relativity. Your consciousness is the most valuable thing to ever exist. You, every single one of you, to watch this video or see this clip or ever just hear this, you are not an NPC. You are the main character of the greatest story ever because it involves you. Just remember that while money, a cool car, and fame are all well and nice, have any of these ever made anyone truly, truly happy? Have any of these allowed your consciousness to be at peace? It is the journey inward to discover what your consciousness truly is that finally puts an end to the human cycle of suffering. And nothing that is outside of your consciousness, outside of what is inside of each and every one of us, can ever fill the void between the conscious mind, who you are in this lifetime, and your metaconsciousness. That part of your consciousness that persists beyond lifetimes. To quote Robin Williams in A Dead Poet Society, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. In medicine, law, business, engineering, these are all noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. We see reflections of our personal metaconsciousness in the love that we share with another person or a beloved pet. We feel it in the comfortable silence between friends. We understand it watching the sunset on a beach or in the beauty of the earth around us. No other consciousness in the world is capable of what you are capable of. No other consciousness has had the experiences you have had or knows what you know. No other consciousness thinks the way that you do or perceives the world the way that you do, which means that nothing and no one could ever replace you. No amount of gold in the universe could ever replace your consciousness, and that, all of that, is what makes your consciousness truly priceless. Something deep within me knows that in the 30 years that this body has been alive on this earth, there is not a single person that I have ever met who was not important. And I know that across all of my lifetimes, my consciousness has ever lived or will ever live. That will remain true. Before I end, I just wanted to thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope that in some small way, I'm able to help you connect with that timeless quantum consciousness within yourself. There truly is magic all around us if we just remember to look for it. Have an absolutely wonderful day. Treat yourself, love yourself, because nothing else will give you that same love. And know that you are. Thank you.